thank you for taking time out of your morning to be here listening to me for a few minutes talk about scams and scam awareness. Particularly today, because of course I'm competing today with the Ryder Cup on a Saturday morning, amongst other Saturday morning things. So it's very lovely to see everybody. And I'm not actually planning to take up a huge amount of time talking about scams, because ultimately my colleagues earlier on have done that. We've looked at scam statistics and we've looked at all of those big numbers. So in the UK, if we look at some UK numbers, £500 million have been scammed in the first 6 months of this year. Latest statistics come out. 49,000 UK pensioners, and I know these are UK statistics, but UK pensioners have been scammed again just over the last 12 months. But actually, scamming is less about numbers, and it's actually about people, it's about individuals, it's about one life that is affected at times and sometimes catastrophically, sometimes just a little, but it undermines trust. Somebody might lose a couple of £100 or a couple of $100. Latest statistics from the US tell us that actually more people in the age group of 20 to 29, what they're calling the millennials, more people in that age group are scammed than any other age group. They're scammed out of small amounts. You know, the average is $400 in those instances. But that undermines trust. And for society to work, we need to be able to trust. But of course, there are bad people out there. There are people out there who, rather than going and doing a day's work, will quite happily look to take somebody else's money off them. And there are certain sectors in society that are potentially more vulnerable, of course, to scamming. But if I was to ask everybody here today, are you likely to be scammed? Chances are most of you would answer no, because scamming is something that we often feel happens to somebody else. And that is the biggest risk of all, and also the area that scammers understand that they can exploit, because we all think it happens to somebody else. We're very certain when we open an email that that email is going to be from a trusted source. We will happily jump onto a public Wi-Fi. We'll be very righteous about public Wi-Fi when we haven't got something urgent to do. But actually, if we need to access something urgently, then it's really tempting just to think, I'll just dip onto the public Wi-Fi. It'll only be for a couple of minutes, and then I'll turn my Wi-Fi connectivity off again. Hands up here, anyone who's done that before, who's just dipped on to public Wi-Fi very briefly, however brief. Of course you have. How long does it take for malware to be downloaded onto your machine? It's about that long, isn't it? Seconds. And so ultimately we go through life thinking it's going to happen to somebody else, and then it happens to us. And when it happens to us, there's a whole series of emotions that occur. Anger, yes. Frustration, yes. Shame, embarrassment. How did I let that happen to me? And of course a sense of loss. We understand that we generally feel loss twice as much as we feel gain. And you know, it's one thing to actually make an investment decision and lose some money that you've investigated and researched. It's a whole different thing to have somebody dip into your bank account and take money out of it. Or for them to convince you to send them money directly to them. They've actually done that with your permission. You have voluntarily sent your hard-earned cash somewhere. And so scamming is about people, scamming is about awareness, and of course it's about trust and the trust that that undermines. But of course we can't control scammers, can we? And we can regulate, and police can investigate, and authorities can investigate, and we can look to shut scamming down. But for every scammer that gets shut down, there's somebody else waiting in the wings to exploit that opportunity, to exploit that human behaviour that we all have. And so we can protect ourselves. We can begin to take control. And if we take control, we put those control measures in, we can allow ourselves to trust. Because the danger with a message like this is that, you know, the message is don't trust anybody. The world is a very scary place, and everything and everybody is frightening and looking to take their money off you, or your money off you. That fortunately isn't the case, but there are enough bad people out there exploiting enough of these frailties in human behaviour that mean that we need to be focused and aware. So just for the next couple of minutes, I'm just going to take us through some of the primary scams, and you'll have, I'm sure, heard about them before or read about them. And you'll sometimes read an article in the newspaper and think, how on earth could that person have allowed that to happen? But the reality is that enough people who didn't think it would happen to them let that happen every single day. So let's start with boiler room scams and how we can take very simple measures to protect ourselves from boiler room scams. Boiler room scams are those things that you will, I'm sure, have been exposed to along the way. If you've got a telephone, you're likely to have at some point had a boiler room scam affect you. I'm using stock images today. I'm sure these lovely people, if you recognise any of them, I'm not sure where that office in the world is, I'm sure these lovely people aren't actually sat in a boiler room. It's unlikely that we'd get a stock image of that. And boiler rooms may look like that, they may not. They may be less pleasant offices somewhere in the world, but somebody's going to pick the phone up to you and they are going to offer you something great. They're going to offer you an investment, given that investment returns generally over the last 10 years haven't been hugely exciting, then they're going to offer you an investment that sounds really good. Now, we have to be careful here. It's very easy for people like myself who work in, around the edges of regulation and work with financial advisory firms to use those sort of phrases that we use all the time. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. If that worked, if we just told everybody if it was too good to be true, it probably was, then we wouldn't see these types of scams occurring. So we need to be careful. We need to recognise that actually when we utilise this language that it's a bit like that. That the danger is that we undermine, really sensible people who will generally just get caught out. And they get caught out because the people that do this are very clever. And they're very practiced and they're very focused. And they make a lot of money from doing it. So it's worth them being practiced and focused. And we are passive when we receive that call. You'll be busy, you'll be doing other things, you'll be distracted, and that phone call comes. And you might have been thinking about investments, and they'll use clever phrases, they'll use terminologies, they'll call their companies things that sound familiar. They'll piggyback off the integrity and the authenticity of a real company by sounding like that. Or they may even suggest that they've been asked to call you by regulators. But there are certain things with boiler room scams that are consistent. They will certainly, usually we expect, look to put you under some time pressure. They'll offer you returns that would be largely unachievable elsewhere. They'll be quite flattering as well though. They'll use phrases that tell you what a sensible investor you are and how they think you will make a good decision. We like that. We like to be told that we are actually good investors, sensible people. People exploit that all the time. So there are some very simple things that we can do with boiler room scams, and for those who are here today, thank you for attending, but for me actually it's the people that you might go and talk to about this. Think about those people in your lives who may be even more vulnerable to this, and go and have a word with them. But it's not about just doing that once, it's about doing that regularly. I go and see my mum and dad every day or so because I'm really lucky that they live 2 minutes down the road. But every week I talk to them about how many unsolicited phone calls they've had and how many emails they're getting. And I just remind them. I remind them of the fact that actually, if anything comes from anything outside of their, or outside of their frame of reference, effectively I say, if it's not me, don't answer it and don't reply to it. And that's a simple message. So think about those people in your lives that may be vulnerable and think about the simple messages you can give them and you can reinforce for them. In terms of boiler room scams, then if you're subject to it yourself, you can check the regulatory status of the firm, either here with the FSA or if it's a UK firm with the FCA. Never click on a link that they send you to check that. Always go and look direct at the URL to a particular regulator. And of course, if it does sound too good to be true, it probably is. I'd take one step further. Nobody that I know in financial services will ever pick the phone up to you and suggest that you invest in something without spending a lot of time with you understanding your circumstances. And nobody that I know in financial services who are legitimate will ever look to time pressure you into an investment. Phishing scams. Using stock images is very difficult to find anything that represents phishing PH, so of course I went for the obvious option. Phishing scams are interesting because of course they look legitimate, and these people that do this generally put a lot of time and a lot of effort into looking like the organisation they're trying to represent. This will more often than not be a bank or building society or an institution that you trust, insurance provider, whatever it might be. It might, these days as well, be another trusted organisation. Apple phishing scams are now very popular because they understand that we trust that organisation, the scammers understand that we trust that organisation, and of course they now understand that so many people are likely to have Apple user accounts. And so where there's ever a chance where they can send out phishing emails and attract responses, they're going to look for organisations that have a lot of our data. And there'll be phishing scams on Facebook and other things, but ordinarily the ones we think about the most are the ones that are banks. And they'll ask you to re-update your password or to give them other data about your bank account. Your bank will never do any of these things. Also, of course, the slide there mentions the police, and the police often will be utilised by scammers. They'll say that the police are looking at a fraud. You'll often see a phishing scam talking about the fact that your bank account has been frauded or defrauded. You need to change your details straight away. Send us those details. Banks, police, legitimate organisations will never ask you via an email to re-input your passwords, data, change a bank account, set up a new bank account, transfer your money at the last minute to avoid being defrauded. They just don't do that. So anything like that, of course, is a scam. So again, if it's unsolicited, then stop the call or ignore the email. If it's a call, and even if then you want to go check it, then go and talk to the organisation, report it to the regulator or talk to the police before then engaging with the organisation.